I'm Jace. I have sex addiction, and I work with a lot of other people who do too. Why can't people with sex addiction just stop? It's a legit question because a lot of this stuff seems insane. And that's exactly what we're going to be talking about in today's video. But before we do, make sure you have subscribed to this channel and that you hit that little bell button so you know when more videos are coming out. You can get more info and updates by joining my newsletter, info in the description below, and make sure to stick around because I have a free resource for you at the end of this video. So, why can't people with sex addiction just stop their insane behavior? And why do they do insane behavior in the first place? Those are totally legit questions. And believe me, I know as an outsider or an insider, this stuff seems totally nuts. And it kind of is. So, whether you are a person with sex addiction or you know someone or maybe love someone who has sex addiction and you are just baffled by the insanity of it all, there are reasons for all of these things. And this isn't true just with sex addiction. This is kind of a brief inside look into what's going on with all of the insanity that follows any area of addiction. As you know by now, if you've watched any other videos, or maybe you've taken my Introduction to Sex Addiction course on my website, you know that when we're talking about addiction, we got to talk about the brain. That is where addiction resides, though it shows up in our outward nutty behavior, but it's really actually something that's going on in the brain. It's a misfunction of the brain, that things are not operating the way that they ought to in a healthy brain. Normally, this starts before the addiction starts. Addiction usually comes as a response to deficits that are already present. They can be biological, or they can be part of a response to the environment during early childhood. And usually there's a combo. As a result, we're talking about the brain in a kid because that's really when this stuff starts to develop. We don't have the normal healthy development of the human brain. So the connections that ought to be forming between the different hemispheres and sections of the brain aren't happening normally the way they would in a healthy brain with someone who's having healthy development. So a lot of this brain function gets stunted at the point that adverse experiences are introduced, which is very consistent with people with addiction. I know we want to be angry with them, or we're even angry with ourselves oftentimes as people with addiction, but this stuff starts really young. And you can learn more about that in some of the other videos on this channel. But the point to all of this is that that normal brain development isn't happening. So things like we have an overdeveloped reward system and a polluted one at that. There's usually a deficit in the neurotransmitters like dopamine. And so our brain is always trying to balance that by boosting that brain chemical in order to be in a balanced state. And it doesn't really care how it does that. And because these are children who are designing ways to feel better, aka have a balance of chemicals, they're usually not really great choices. And then they get stuck in the brain. And we have that stunted development, and we have a lack of connection in the different parts of the brain. So in the simplest terms, we have a part of the brain where things like emotional regulation, willpower, good decision making, judgment, long-term consequences, analyzing, kind of our newer part of the brain that has all of those really wonderful qualities that make for a high-functioning adult, they aren't getting accessed in the same way with the brain of a person with addiction because of that stunted development. And so things like, why can't you see how this is going to damage your life? You know, like this behavior is going to result in this consequence. Like, why don't you understand that? Maybe someone has said that to you, or maybe you've said that to someone, or maybe you've even said it to yourself, that you just can't seem to grasp that, or to make good judgment calls, or to, have the willpower to just stop the behavior. This is actually just a function of the brain. It's not a shitty person. It's not a weak person. They don't have loose morals and all of these things that we used to think with addiction. But that function, that is going to that newer part of the brain that says like, hey, this might not be the best idea. Like maybe don't do this thing because you're going to destroy your whole family and your life and you're going to hurt a lot of people. That's not connecting. The reality of that consequence isn't actually landing in the brain. And we aren't in a space to process and analyze life and really grasp it. On top of that, but wait, there's more. Addiction really is tied to our reward system, which is in our limbic system, which is our survival system, that fight, flight, freeze scenario that goes on in our brain. Because of that, because these behaviors or these substances are tying into our survival system, it trumps everything. So even if there is some understanding of those consequences, the brain is telling the body, yeah, okay, I hear you, but you're about to die. So we're going to go ahead and prioritize your survival over that maybe possible thing that might happen later on, but it's definitely not going to happen if you're dead, which is literally about to happen right now. Now, are we actually going to die if we don't watch pornography? No. Does our brain know that? No, because anxiety and stress are in the same part of the brain as something like being held up at gunpoint. And the brain doesn't really have a way to distinguish what is a real threat and what is a perceived threat. Because this stuff is being developed in childhood, we're looking at the perceived threats to life from a child's brain's point of view. And since children are completely dependent on those who are caring for them, that idea of threat looks very different. That signal still gets sent to the brain because this becomes ongoing. We're in that chronic stress response. So we're living in that survival part of the brain all the time, which is also exhausting all of our other systems and just creating, bad news bears all around. But we really have tied these behaviors to survival, and they're already linked in. So we're already set up to have them develop that way. And because of deficiencies resulting from adverse childhood experiences, as well as some genetic components, we don't have the same ability to recognize things like long-term consequences or the harm that's being caused. And even when we do recognize those, they get trumped by this need for survival. That's what's going on. That's why people with addiction do super crazy things that seem totally insane and they don't make any sense to outside people or to the person with addiction. And please understand that these aren't like well thought out choices being made. Like, okay, here's what might happen and I might hurt so-and-so and, oh, this could be really destructive, but fuck that, I'm doing it anyway. That's not what's going on. And I know it can feel that way because this stuff is very hurtful and very harmful, and it's hard not to take personally, especially when we're talking about sex addiction, which includes like our deepest part of our humanity and links our spirituality as well. And like we bond that way with others. And it really gets down to the core of all of the things on a deep level. And so this stuff is even additionally hurtful maybe than other areas of addiction. So I do understand that. And these aren't excuses for those behaviors that are harmful, but it's just what's going on. It's just the explanation for it. The good news is the brain can be healed. Yes, these things developed. Yes, they misdeveloped. Yes, there's been a stunt in development as a result of these things, but our brain can be healed. It can be molded our whole lives. So this is not hopeless. It's not like, well, that's your brain, so, that's your life, too bad. No, my friend, absolutely not. There are many paths to recovery of all varying kinds. I guide one of self-mastery, so we're talking a holistic path of recovery where we don't just deal with the symptoms, but we actually master the self beneath the addiction. And there are other holistic programs, and then there are symptomatic treatment programs as well. It's 2021. There are millions of people with sex addiction and so many options of all varying degrees to deal with it. And a lot of those initially focus on sobriety because that's what allows the healing of the brain. And then we want to add on top of that by building an intentional, full, happy, healthy life and healing those things from the past so that we can kind of update our brain into adulthood and start having a healthy communication for the different hemispheres and the different parts of the brain, so that then we can recognize like, oh, that's a terrible plan, not going to do that plan. And then we have the ability to carry that out and actually have agency over who we are and how we show up in the world. It's very possible. It's actually not as hard as you might be thinking if you're working with someone who really knows what they're doing and does so in a shame-free, loving, holistic environment or method. This stuff it might be new to you. It's not new. People have been working in this field for decades, and there's advancements all the time, and there are options for every personality, every style, every budget, you name it. There is a way to heal from sex addiction as well as all other areas of addiction. And you can start today. If you're done with this bullshit and you don't want to be in the insanity anymore, you can start your recovery today. A quick internet search will give you lots of options. If you're curious in the one that I guide, you can check out jacedowney.com and stick around for that free resource, which is coming up right after this and is going to help exactly in this area. Thank you so much for your time. I love you very much. And until I see you next time, stay curious. Hello again. I am really, really excited. You know how I get excited. I'm so excited to get to offer this resource to you for free. I've taken one of my all-time favorite workshops that I give in person and condensed it down into a little mini course that you can take online at your convenience. We're going to be talking about how to go from that sense of powerless to a state of empowered, what is needed, and how to get there. It is free. It is on my website and it is waiting for you right now. Click the link below to get free access to this mini workshop. I'll see you over there.